Mike, team, we're seeing some attendees joining us. Hi, everyone. So we have Bob, Earl, John, Terry, and Trey. Welcome, you guys. Let's wait for the others to join. I think we're a bit early. I think we have a good number of attendees. Mike, you ready?
Sure enough, yeah, let's get started.
Sounds good. Everyone, good morning, good afternoon, whichever you are. Well, welcome once again to our webinar, Ransomware Prevention, Recovery, and Response. Of course, ransomware has been a topic since the pre-pandemic, but as soon as most businesses are left with no choice but to adapt to the remote work, this has been a hot topic. Would everyone agree to that?
Certainly.
Right. So, of course, thank you for your interest in joining us today. My name is K6, and I'll be your host for this session. With me, of course, are the subject matter experts of this topic. We have Mike Colisante, the person who's leading the U.S. storage and DR business in the U.S. market. At the same time, Zachary Nielsen, which also run the U.S. technical team. Hi, gents.
Hey, Kay.
All right. Of course, before I give the floor to Mike, feel free to send your questions in the chat panel below. And then, of course, towards the Q&A session, we'll bring them up and have Mike at the same time, Zach, answer all those. So without further ado, Mike, I'll give you the floor.
Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining our webinar. I'm going to get started. I have a lot to cover. Ransomware is an immense topic, and we're going to move through this quickly. I encourage you to download the presentation and explore the footnotes and reference material. It's well worth your time. We're going to break this into 3 sections. The first is going to talk about the trends and threats for cyber criminals in 2022. After that, we'll walk through some specific examples, and then we'll close it out with some last line of defense tips. My first disclaimer: if world-renowned quantum physicist Niels Bohr can't predict the future, I don't have a chance. So keep that in mind as I go into predicting the future. Big trend in 2022 will be cybercrime incorporated. Initial access brokers breach security and sell access to attackers to use as they see fit. In 2022, there were 1,300 access listings, and nearly half of those were attributed to only about 10 IABs. The average price was $4,600. These are large, evolving organizations generating billions in cash. The timeline from buying access to attack averages about 30 days. So that's a pretty fast time to market for any business, and these criminals aren't wasting any time. Also, it's no surprise, the most valuable credentials are domain admin, RDP, and VPN. IABs have a very sophisticated model. It's like buying a marketing list. You're going to get employee count, revenue, type of access. It has all the information you need to attack, as well as set a ransom price that matches the company's size financially. Next, we have accomplice-based attacks. This one always seemed like an urban legend to me until I started researching. Recruitment is real, it's on the rise, and it can be tempting. Here are some examples. I'll point out the one in the bottom right corner. 40%, maybe $1 million in Bitcoin. And also remember, 27% reported they were contacted by phone. Now let's move on to the motives. This slide reminds me of the crime show adage, you're most likely to be murdered by someone you know. The motives are endless, and a few examples: passed over for promotion, not paid enough. The number one excuse for employee theft: didn't think I'd get caught. I'm guessing that one applies to a whole bunch of poor choices. So let's move in and talk money. Simply put, ransomware is a multi-billion-dollar racket with plenty of money to go around. It's also difficult to trace and attribute blame. An insider may think, I won't get caught. So let's explore the implications for security. The third row is my favorite. Security awareness training is ineffective and can also teach malicious insiders how to be better fake victims. Security is always going to be a balancing act. I used to joke that if I can do my job, security's too lax. I'm going to talk a little bit about the tools and evasion. Criminals are investing in evasive techniques and often evade by hiding in plain sight. I encourage you to explore the footnotes. They're well worth your time. For now, let's just say these guys are smart and determined. And let's look at the common evasive technique called living off the land. 40% of attacks have some element of living off the land. This is where attackers gain access and remain undiscovered by using common tools. In fact, 91% use publicly available and legitimate tools. Let's look at an example of an LOTL chain. A Word doc with a malicious macro arrives via phishing. Open the doc, it loads an embedded VB script that calls PowerShell to download and run Cobalt Strike and provides for C2. In many cases, this is hard to detect. The implications of living off the land: we can't rely on known bad files. Among other measures, we need pattern tracking as well as in-depth asset and user context to develop a widespread and custom anomaly detection. Let's move into some real-world examples. We're going to discuss 2 examples. First is a ransomware attack on a single company, while the other demonstrates how infection on a single server caused a massive global impact. In the first example, we've removed the name. They're not ready to advertise the details of this challenge. And it started, as so many do, with a user opening an email. They thought it was a link to dogs, cats, puppies, you know, whatever you're going to get. They thought it was a link to dogs, cats, puppies, whatever. We know email and social engineering is often the weakest security link. I don't remember the exact version of the infection, just that it did the job. Auto install, crawl the systems, gather intelligence. And this one's interesting because nothing obvious happened right away. It was searching the networks to propagate for a while. Think about it. They balanced the time to gather information for maximum pain without being discovered. So in this case, it ran for about 2 to 3 weeks, which is on average. Ultimately, it found about 400 Windows servers. Then overnight, it encrypted all the hard drives on every device running Windows. They completely locked up. The IT squad began receiving their alerts in the middle of the night. Another interesting note, almost 35% of companies run their backup applications on Windows servers. That fact highlights this company's challenge because the next logical step is to restore from backup. Not this time. Ransomware attacked all Windows machines, including their backup servers. They couldn't recover from backup. Employees arrive, can't log in. They swamp the help desk with calls. Knowing they don't have a quick fix, they send all the employees home until further notice. While working the problem, the ransom demand and instructions showed up. Pay the ransom in Bitcoin to an address in 24 hours. So now let's recap. 1 second to click, 3 weeks to incubate, overnight to encrypt, and then demand for payment same day. Of course, the company doesn't have a Bitcoin account, nor do the employees. So the short version, they decided to pay the $70,000 ransom. Eventually, they found a friend of an employee with an account. Now finance is involved, never a good thing. Anyway, finance approved and wired $70,000 to the employee's friend account to pay their ransom. And it isn't clear if the legal department was approved on this. My guess is they begged for forgiveness rather than approval. That had to be their state of mind. Payments made and the decryption keys arrive as promised. Reportedly, 83% of companies that pay the ransom receive accurate decryption keys. So there's a pretty good chance you'll receive the keys. But remember, we're dealing with criminals. So the extortion scheme to work, they have to provide the keys. However, customer service and ease of use is not essential to their business model. I say this because they received about 400 different keys bundled in a text file with no indication of which to use where. The next step is to try each key one by one, server by server. So imagine this, you try it server, no match, another key, no match. Next key, yes, it's a match. Cross it off the list, set it aside, rinse and repeat about 400 times. This tedious, time-consuming process highlights the fallacy of pay the ransom and get back in business quickly. Now, having decrypted a few servers, they're thinking the problem's over, we just need to grind it out, but not so fast. While decrypting, some servers start to crash. It's time to stop and investigate why are they crashing. They discover the decryption process is not very elegant. In fact, it simply creates a decrypted copy on the same drive. An important distinction, because if the drive was 60% full and you try to decrypt it, you'll run out of space. Time to stop everything, shuffle data, and expand the drives. Fortunately, with virtual machines, it's not complicated, but it does require time. So you finish decrypting, you double check everything before releasing access. Employees return to work after about 3 days out. Considering their situation and obstacles, 3 days is pretty good. The average outage in 2021 was 22 days. But even after just 3 days, the business impact was huge, and not just loss of productivity. Being a just-in-time supply company, they violated contractual SLAs. They took a hit to their reputation among employees, customers, and business partners. It exposed the IT team's lack of preparation and tools to protect the company. So let's summarize. They paid $70,000. Then IT worked like crazy for 72 hours straight, and they brought all the systems back online. The final estimated cost about $12 million for a 3-day outage. And again, for their situation, this was just about the best case scenario. The bottom line is ransom is a small part of the total cost. And remember, these criminals have no incentive to provide a positive customer experience. They're not looking for a good Yelp review. So this is a great example of a ransomware's impact on a single company. Now let's look at the global impact that started from a single server. NotPetya is believed to be a state-sanctioned cyber attack by Russia against Ukraine. It entered most companies through the ME Docs application, referred to as the QuickBooks of Ukraine. It's used by 400,000 companies, 90% of which are domestic. You can see the list of major domestic enterprises affected by the outage, but it didn't stop there. It spread across the globe, affecting many multinational companies. And the global estimate from the White House is 10 trillion in damages. 10 trillion sounds a little roundy to me, but I guess the term close enough for government work truly applies here. 10 trillion, no matter how you slice it, is a lot of money. Companies like FedEx, Merck, Saint-Gobain, which I had to look them up. They're a French multinational company with about 170,000 employees, and they make all kinds of hard goods. Incidentally, they started as a mirror manufacturer in 1665. So that's for your Trivial Pursuit questions. We're going to take a closer look at Maersk. Maersk is the second largest container ship. For 25 years, they were the first, just recently became the second, with over 60 billion in revenue and a huge part of the global supply chain. Their problem started with a single server running ME Docs in Odessa, Ukraine. It immediately caused 20% reduction in operations, impacting 17 main ports all over the world. Think about it. All this started from one little software package in one little office. The recovery was a long and expensive undertaking. Early in the process, they hired Deloitte to do whatever it takes. They had backups for most servers, but the biggest problems were the domain code controllers, all wiped simultaneously. It was a long and interesting story, and I suggest you read through some of the many publicly available reports on NotPetya. The short version of the recovery: they found the domain controller in Ghana, Africa, that was offline due to a power outage, so it wasn't corrupted. It was eventually transported to the UK for examination and recovery process to begin. Affected ports opened after about 3 days, and a return to operations occurred after about 10 to 14 days. Again, the total cost of about 300 million for Maersk alone. All this information is great, but how do we ensure we have options, one of which has to be a predictable recovery timeline? It starts with multiple layers of protection. Training is the first thing to tackle, and it's not a one and done. It's continuous and tested. If employees can receive email, sooner or later, a malicious email will make it through. The second way is at the edge. The idea is that if a person clicks a known bad link, edge protection instantly blocks it right at the edge. Keep in mind, most of these protect laptops, not necessarily all devices. It's not an easy problem because emails arrive on phones, laptops, iPads, and at some point, all these devices will be on the same network talking to each other. So let's talk about the third layer, antivirus. We've been running AV and malware protection for years. There's plenty of choices. Pick one and keep it up to date. Speaking of keeping it up to date, patch your systems. I hear all kinds of excuses. My favorite is, one time it broke a server, so I just stay 2 or 3 releases behind. Security patches are a core requirement. Systematically patch everything as soon as possible. Next, we have backups. They can save you if they're not susceptible to attack or intrusions. Many traditional backup applications offer protection, but they may also be vulnerable to attacks, especially if they run on a Windows server or as a VM. We've all heard it before. Backup is only as good as your ability to restore. The question is not only if you can recover, but how fast you'll recover. What's the recovery process? And is it well documented? If you're hit by malware, how long will it take to restore all your VMs to a specific point in time? Often, we don't know for sure because we don't test at scale. Limited resources often means limited testing, maybe only 20 to 30% of capacity. Another note, testing a failover by pulling the big red switch, as I call it, isn't the same as testing against a ransomware attack. Replication for high availability is excellent for some failures. but it's also excellent at replicating infected data. You need to look at rolling back, say, 45 minutes to a good copy of all VMs. How does that work? How do you know the recovery point? How do you find a safe recovery point and avoid infection? You have many moving parts that all need to be synchronized. So let's look at some steps. So in a real world disaster, let's say training failed, they got through, the edge didn't stop it, AV wasn't up to date, you delayed patched or missing a server. Maybe it hit all the Windows servers and even vCenter, so your backups are compromised. Maybe your file system was infected. This means you need to go back further in time. So let's say recovery is your only option. At Backup Technology, we've faced DR scenarios for over 18 years and have never lost a client's data. In a recovery situation, Backup Technology becomes the last line of defense for our clients. I'd say we're a DR company, but in reality, we're more like a DR testing company. We spend 50x more time testing, documenting, reporting, and running DR drills than managing actual disasters. Knock on wood, I hope this remains the case for a long time. Just know that at any point in time, we're performing client tests, and our DR response team is constantly training and ready when a disaster strikes. Let's talk quickly about the recovery process, and more importantly, how we ensure your data is available to be restored. The first precaution is our reduced attack surface. Our hardened hyper-converged appliance with non-disruptive upgrades handles backups, files, objects, global dedupe, indexing, and much more, all within a single platform. On top of that, we manage your global operations from a single UI on a platform built to minimize attack surface. Next, we built in vulnerability scans to access your security posture. Next, we use built-in vulnerability scans to assess your security posture. If our scans detect something or find a vulnerability, we send alerts. Keep in mind, we're scanning backups, not production. It's not a replacement for production level defense. But when we do find a vulnerability in backup data, we give you the insight and ability to instantly recover that VM back to the last known good point. Next, we ensure backups aren't compromised. We use an immutable file system, multi-factor authentication, worm, and a feature called data lock. Incidentally, when data lock is enabled, the data cannot be deleted. No one can override its schedule. So if you select, say, 30 years instead of 30 days, that data is locked for 30 years. Our platform is built from the file system up, first and foremost, to be resistant to ransomware and malware. Next, we have anomaly detection. This is huge. Our scans look for known security vulnerabilities. Anomaly detection is different. We alert you when there's a significant change from the usual pattern. Maybe a higher change rate, or we can't index some files today because they were encrypted, and last night's backup, they weren't. Our anomaly detection is a constantly evolving machine learning model. It customizes itself to your backups and situation. It's important to manage your recovery points, so if a problem is detected, you don't lose many changes. For instance, if we're doing CDP on VMs, we may discover an anomaly very fast and have a great recovery point compared to a traditional nightly backup. Our anomaly detection engine will also give you the exact time it occurred, reducing time to discover the appropriate recovery point. Let's look at recovery. We do what's called an instant mass restore. I tend to describe it as an instant mass mount because we don't have to move any data before granting you access. This process isn't entirely unique, but we've implemented it in a secure and efficient way. As we walk through this animation, you'll see some of that. So as we take our first copy, let's call it backup 0, and move it into our system, that becomes a full immutable copy. Now, this is where we do things a bit differently. When we take our next incremental, whether it's an hour or 6 hours, it doesn't matter. We take a zero-cost clone of that first backup and then apply the incremental to that clone, creating another full recovery point. All these images are full and instant recovery points. We build a catalog of instant restorable, usable images. Moving forward to create the next immutable recovery point, we do the same thing. Take a zero-cost clone of backup number one, and then we take the block changes and apply them. Now we have 3 immutable images ready for instant recovery. That's how the backup works. For recovery, we do it with a near zero RTO and at scale with hundreds of virtual machines all at once. We present those VMs back to vCenter. They're all mounted on our storage, powered on, access is granted, and then storage vMotion is automatically initiated. So for some time, you're running on our storage platform, but the VMs are available almost instant. For hundreds of VMs, the storage vMotion can take a while, but you have access instantly to start working with the servers. So let's compare this to a traditional legacy restore. In a traditional legacy restore, you're going to initiate the restore, wait for the VM to rehydrate or fully restore, and then move it to the target device, even possibly add an incremental along the way, and then the users get access. They don't get access until the very end of that process. Depending on the backup solution and data sizes, that process can take 45 minutes or more. In our scenario, we initiate backup and give the users access right away, literally within seconds, so they can start working on the system. Then we worry about moving the data back to your PowerMax NVMe or Pure or Nimble or whatever you use as your primary storage array. We don't care where it ends up. We're giving you access immediately. In some cases, you may not want to move it at all. Let's say you need a VM to test an application upgrade. Just mount it and use it on our platform. Again, the big difference here is immediate access, and it's about 10 times faster to get your system back online. So let me summarize. We focus on recoverability. It's about having a small attack surface and a single global platform to manage it. It's about having vulnerability scanning, what we call cyber scan, to assess your security. It's about keeping backups safe with worm immutability, requiring a quorum for administrative tasks, and it's all built into the platform from the ground up. Next, it's about detection. We effectively detect anomalies on your backup data. Again, we're not monitoring the production data. Actually, with a product called Smart Files, we are, but that's a story for a different day. Often, we're going to catch these anomalies. Often, we're going to catch anomalies and alert you when they're detected. And finally, it's all about responding. When you're in a situation, you need to be able to respond and elevate your options. Finally, it's all about responding. When you're in this situation, you need to be able to respond and evaluate your options clearly and confident. To do this, you need predictable recovery timelines and accurate recovery point information. Our annual tests equip you with these tools, and in many cases, you're alerted as soon as possible. Our annual tests equip you with these tools, and in many cases, we're alerted as soon as you are. Thank you for taking the time out of your busy day to join me. We've covered a lot of material, and we have some time for questions.
We have one from Shar. The question goes, what basic steps would you recommend I do to prevent ransomware?
Probably going to let Zachary take a run at that one. I've been talking too much here.
We actually, part of our response kit when we get together with you is actually we go through a lot of the scenarios of gathering up information about your systems, how they're put together, how they need to be restored. A lot of times during those times, we'll be able to identify where the weaknesses are at and vulnerabilities in your processes, because we do this on a regular basis. We do this day in and day out. So we understand where some of the weaknesses are and where the ransomware can get its foothold, and specifically where ransomware can do most of its damage in your organization, just as we go through the initial finding of your environment.
Thanks, Zach. And of course, speaking of the checklist, let me send it here in our chat panel. There's the link in there which you can download the said checklist. All right. Another question we have here. I think Mike, you mentioned about attack surface, right? There's a question in here as to what do you mean by reduce the attack surface?
Yeah, that's another good question, right? Because it can be interpreted a lot of different ways. I think generally what we're looking at is we're comparing what traditional legacy style backup and DR solutions are. And, a lot of times you have a lot of different applications running, and they each have separate, memory, compute, and they have a separate surface that needs to be protected. So you may have a backup software that is its own contained product that is writing to, say, a data domain or some storage that does dedupe, and that's another complete product. And maybe you're scanning it and you have another product that does the scanning. Some of these products have a third-party gateway product that actually writes it to to your cloud storage and stuff. So you have all of these separate applications that are points that need to be covered with firewalls and ports and everything. And really, the way our platform is built, it's a kind of a self-contained platform where each node has its own CPU, memory, basically self-contained. And on top of that, we run the application. So you have one platform that runs the applications, and it's all built within that hardened kernel. And you add, as you add new CPU and new nodes, it also adds the horsepower needed. So whether you're doing a cyber scan or data analysis products, even when you're using a third-party product, it's actually running on our platform and it's integrated into the platform. It's not spin up another VM that talks to the backup or the storage or something. So that's kind of what we mean by minimizing that attack surface.
Mm-hmm. Understood. You have discussed this about the services of backup technology and, of course, the difference between the legacy and what we do. But a follow-up question here would be, I have a good backup and a plan as well. So what makes your service different?
I'll take that one, Mike.
Sure.
Yeah, but we've all been down this road once or twice in the technical world. Backups we've been breathing and living that for the past several decades. What makes a difference? The first thing is the backups have got to be good, right? It doesn't work if the backups aren't restorable. I think Mike mentioned that Windows-based backup solutions are a red flag because that tends to be the primary target. The secondary target now is VMware. VMware is now starting to be encrypted. They're going in and actually using the vulnerabilities of VMware and getting right on the VMware servers and starting to encrypt the VMs that are running. So there's a second point. What we've got to do is make sure that those backups are secure. Are they away from your production systems in an isolated fashion? Are they separate from the domain? There's several things that we look at when we're doing a discovery on the environment. Also doing some research on the vendor, find out we always hear the good stuff from the marketing guys. Also seek out possible failures of the backup product. They're harder to find, but those stories are out there, and just understand where the weaknesses are, because everybody has a weakness, and exactly how are they resolving or working to mitigate those vulnerabilities or those weaknesses that they have in their product. And then I would say what makes our service different, that's a little bit of a longer conversation. It's us helping you go in and discover your systems, bringing our experience of doing restores on a regular basis on how things can be restored in a better fashion, where your vulnerabilities is. If this system is lost, how do you actually recover your data? Is it actually offsite? Is that offsite protected? I think we just heard Mike was telling me about statistics about 70 to 80% of the security problems are us, our teams. It's just we're stressed. There's too much going on, and it only takes missing one setting or missing one patch to have those vulnerabilities exposed and to be leveraged at the wrong time. So it's our experience that we bring, and we also help you practice these things, and I think that covers most of that question.
Mhm. All right. Thanks, Zach. And of course, like any other else, aside the value proposition of backup technology, the follow-up question in here coming from Terry Tyrell, coming from a small company or a smaller company, can you provide a ballpark range of pricing?
Yeah, I'd say that it depends what a small company is, I guess. Our solutions don't tend to work financially for people with just a few terabytes of data. We do have it in accounts that maybe have 5 to 10 terabytes, but frankly, there's a lot of things that can solve problems for 1 or 2 terabytes. Our sweet spot tends to be above 10, closer to the 2 to 300 terabytes, but we do scale down, so it's kind of a per terabyte thing. But Terry, if you want to reach out directly, I don't mind chatting with you. It only take 10 or 15 minutes to give you an idea. Like I said, traditionally our customer base tends to be between 100 terabytes to maybe 700 is kind of our range, but we do scale down to smaller businesses.
All right, thanks, Mike. And I'm not so sure, Mike, Zach, if you can see in our chat panel in here, another question from Dan. Would you like to take this one? The question goes, does the ransomware have exfil capabilities? So some ransomware will make copies of the files so that the attacker can threaten to release the files even if the ransom is not paid. So how would you prevent this?
Yeah, and that's a great point. So, we do have, when we're acting as production data, we do have an immediate response if a certain amount of data is leaving the system and it's outside of a normal pattern. But if it's happening on your VM and we're only doing backups, frankly, we're not monitoring your production side of it in that part of it. So we do have, we can be the production for your file systems, file shares, even as a repository for certain types of data, but not on the high performance side if somebody happens to be pulling out, specific VMs or something. So from that standpoint, that's going to be another product. But if it's running on ours as production, then yeah, we're going to see when that data is leaving, and really the machine learning pattern, which users do what. So it's very detailed as to who's doing what, and if somebody new is pulling a bunch of data out of there, whether it's ransomware or just a disgruntled employee or a salesperson who's trying to leave the company, that we're going to see those types of things and have it in the file system audit logs.
Okay, that'll be our last question. We have a few more here, but of course, we also value your time. To everyone who joined this session, thank you, everyone. We'll send you a copy of this recording, by the way. And if you do have some questions for Mike or the rest of the team, feel free to send it over. We'll provide our contact information just in case you want to reach out to us. All right, Mike, Zach, thank you for your time. So as all the attendees, we'll talk to you again soon.
Thank you.
All right, thanks.
Bye.